Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to discuss Neil Postman's Technology. Subtitle is The Surrender of Culture to Technology. I love Professor Postman. I've read a lot of his books. I'm shocked actually that this is the first time that I've done a review of his book for the channel. I think part of it is it's back there on the all-time list, and you've been noticing this summer that I've finally been getting to talking about some of the books on my all-time list. And when I say talking about, since I'm always rereading these books, I probably hesitate from giving a definitive final review. Sometimes I have, sometimes I haven't. But what I've generally been doing is just taking some excerpts and reading you a little bit of it to give you some insight into why I find it a valuable book. And I think that's what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just read a little bit from the introduction and then a bit from chapter 1 to set up Professor Postman's argument for you to then follow along and hopefully get the book. In 1959, Sir Charles Snow published The Two Cultures and the Scientific Revolution, which was both the title and the subject of the Reed lecture he had given earlier at Cambridge University. The lecture was intended to illuminate what Sir Charles saw as a great problem of our age, the opposition of art and science, or more precisely, the implacable hostility between literary intellectuals, sometimes called humanists, and physical scientists. The publication of the book caused a small rumble among academics, let us say a 2.3 on the Richter scale, not least because Snow came down so firmly on the side of the scientists, giving humanists ample reason and openings for sharp, funny, and nasty riposts. But the controversy did not last long, and the book quickly faded from view. For good reason. Sir Charles had posed the wrong question, given the wrong argument, and therefore offered an irrelevant answer. Humanists and scientists have no quarrel, at least none that is of sufficient interest to most people. Nonetheless, to Snow must go some considerable credit for noticing that there are two cultures, that they are in fierce opposition to each other, and that it is necessary for a great debate to ensue about the matter. Had he been attending less to the arcane dissatisfactions of those who dwell in faculty clubs, and more to the lives of those who have never been in one, he would surely have seen that the argument is not between humanists and scientists, but between technology and everybody else. This is not to say that everybody else recognizes this. In fact, most people believe that technology is a staunch friend. There are two reasons for this. First, technology is a friend. It makes life easier, cleaner, and longer. Can anyone ask more of a friend? Second, because of its lengthy, intimate, and inevitable relationship with culture, technology does not invite a close examination of its own consequences. It is the kind of friend that asks for trust and obedience, which most people are inclined to give because its gifts are truly bountiful. But of course there is a dark side to this friend. Its gifts are not without a heavy cost. Stated in the most dramatic terms, the accusation can be made that the uncontrolled growth of technology destroys the vital sources of our humanity. It creates a culture without a moral foundation. It undermines certain mental processes and social relations that make human life worth living. Technology, in sum, is both friend and enemy. This book attempts to describe when, how, and why technology became a particularly dangerous enemy. The case has been argued many times before by authors of great learning and conviction, in our own times by Louis Mumford, Jacques Ellul, Harbert Read, Arnold Gellin, Ivan Illich, to name a few. The argument was interrupted only briefly by Snow's irrelevancies and has continued into our own time with a sense of urgency, made even more compelling by America's spectacular display of technological preeminence in the Iraqi War. This book came out in 1992, so to set that time for that comment. I do not say here that the war was unjustified or that the technology was misused, only that the American success may serve as a confirmation of the catastrophic idea that in peace, as well as war, technology will be our savior. So that's the introduction, and now I'm just going to read the first few pages of chapter 1, hopefully whet your appetite and get you interested in getting a copy of the book, which you can do. I'll put a link in the description, and as I always say, consider hitting like or subscribe if you like what you're hearing. It's a way to get more of this content and to share more of this content with other people. Chapter 1, The Judgment of Thamus. You will find in Plato's Phaedrus a story about Thamus, the king of a great city of Upper Egypt. For people such as ourselves who are inclined, in Thoreau's phrase, to be tools of our tools, few legends are more instructive than his. The story, as Socrates tells it to his friend Phaedrus, unfolds in the following way. Thamus once entertained the god Theuth, who was the inventor of many things, including number, calculation, geometry, astronomy, and writing. Theuth exhibited his inventions to King Thamus, claiming that they should be made widely known and available to Egyptians. Socrates continues, Thamus inquired into the use of each of them, and as Theuth went through them, expressed approval or disapproval, according as he judged Theuth's claims to be well or ill-founded. It would take too long to go through all that Thamus is reported to have said for and against each of Theuth's inventions. But when it came to writing, Theuth declared, Here is an accomplishment, my lord the king, which will improve both the wisdom and the memory of the Egyptians. I have discovered a sure receipt for memory and wisdom. To this, Thamus replied, Theuth, my paragon of inventors, the discoverer of an art is not the best judge of the good or harm which will accrue to those who practice it. So it is in this. You, who are the father of writing, have out of fondness for your offspring attributed to it quite the opposite of its real function. Those who acquire it will cease to exercise their memory and become forgetful. They will rely on writing to bring things to their remembrance by external signs, instead of by their own internal resources. What you have discovered is a receipt for recollection, not for memory. And as for wisdom, your pupils will have the reputation for it without the reality. They will receive a quantity of information without proper instruction, and in consequence be thought very knowledgeable, when they are for the most part quite ignorant. And because they are filled with the conceit of wisdom, instead of real wisdom, they will be a burden to society. Think about that critique of writing. I'm obviously reading to you from a book review. I'm reading to you from a book, doing a book review, so stay with me, okay? I begin my book with this legend because in Thamus's response there are several sound principles from which we may begin to learn how to think with wise circumspection about a technological society. In fact, there is even one error in the judgment of Thamus, from which we may also learn something of importance. The error is not in his claim that writing will damage memory and create false wisdom. It is demonstrable that writing has had such an effect. Thamus's error is in his believing that writing will be a burden to society and nothing but a burden. For all his wisdom, he fails to imagine what writing's benefits may be, which, as we know, have been considerable. We may learn from this that it is a mistake to suppose that any technological innovation has a one-sided effect. Every technology is both a burden and a blessing. Not either or, but this and that. And I remember the very first time I read this, and I saw the frame that Professor Postman was giving us, and I was stunned by it, because we are so used to thinking that technology is just an unmitigated good. And we sweep aside the consequences. And he's saying it's not an either or. It's a this and that. You then have to examine and sometimes take measures. Nothing could be more obvious, of course, especially to those who have given more than 2 minutes of thought to the matter. Nonetheless, we are currently surrounded by throngs of zealous Theuths, one-eyed prophets who see only what new technologies can do and are incapable of imagining what they will undo. We might call such people technophiles. They gaze on technology as a lover does on his beloved, seeing it as without blemish and entertaining no apprehension for the future. They are therefore dangerous and are to be approached cautiously. On the other hand, some one-eyed prophets, such as I, or so I am accused, are inclined to speak only of burdens, in the manner of Thamus, and are silent about the opportunities that new technologies make possible. The technophiles must speak for themselves, and do so all over the place. My defense is that a dissenting voice is sometimes needed to moderate the din made by the enthusiastic multitudes. If one is to err, it is better to err on the side of Thamusian skepticism. But it is an error nonetheless, and I might note that, with the exception of his judgment on writing, Thamus does not repeat this error. You might notice on rereading the legend that he gives arguments for and against each of Theuth's inventions. For it is inescapable that every culture must negotiate with technology, whether it does so intelligently or not. A bargain is struck in which technology giveth and technology taketh away. The wise know this well, and are rarely impressed by dramatic technological changes, and never overjoyed. Here, for example, is Freud on the matter, from his doleful Civilization and its Discontents. One would like to ask, is there, then, no positive gain in pleasure? No unequivocal increase in my feeling of happiness, if I can, as often as I please, hear the voice of a child of mine who is living hundreds of miles away? Or if I can learn in the shortest possible time after a friend has reached his destination that he has come through the long and difficult journey unharmed? Does it mean nothing that medicine has succeeded in enormously reducing infant mortality and the danger of infection for women in childbirth, and indeed in considerably lengthening the average life of a civilized man? Freud knew full well that technological and scientific advances are not to be taken lightly, which is why he begins the passage by acknowledging them. But he ends it by reminding us of what they have undone. If there had been no railway to conquer distances, my child would never have left his native town, and I should need no telephone to hear his voice. If traveling across the ocean by ship had not been introduced, my friend would not have embarked on his sea voyage, and I should not need a cable to relieve my anxiety about him. What is the use of reducing infantile mortality when it is precisely that reduction which imposes the greatest restraint on us in the begetting of children, so that taken all round we nevertheless rear no more children than in the days before the reign of hygiene, while at the same time we have created difficult conditions for our sexual life and marriage? And finally, what good to us is a long life if it is difficult and barren of joys, and if it is so full of misery that we can only welcome death as a deliverer? I don't have a whole lot of time for Freud, but there are a few good things that he says here. In tabulating the costs of technological progress, Freud takes a rather depressing line, that of a man who agrees with Thoreau's remark that our inventions are but improved means to an unimproved end. The technophile would surely answer Freud by saying that life has always been barren of joys and full of miseries, but that the telephone, ocean liners, and especially the reign of hygiene have not only lengthened life, but made it a more agreeable proposition. That is certainly an argument I would make, thus proving I am no one-eyed technophobe. But it is not necessary at this point to pursue it. I have brought Freud into the conversation only to show that a wise man, even one of such a woeful countenance, must begin his critique of technology by acknowledging its successes. Had King Thamus been as wise as reputed, he would not have forgotten to include in his judgment a prophecy about the powers that writing would enlarge. There is a calculus of technological change that requires a measure of even-handedness. So much for Thamus's error of omission. There is another omission worthy of note, but it is no error. Thamus simply takes for granted, and therefore does not feel it necessary to say, that writing is not a neutral technology whose good or harm depends on the uses made of it. He knows that the uses made of any technology are largely determined by the structure of the technology itself. That is, its functions follow from its form. This is why Thamus is concerned not with what people will write, he is concerned that people will write. It is absurd to imagine Thamus advising, in the manner of today's standard brand technophiles, that if only writing would be used for the production of certain kinds of texts and not others, let us say, for dramatic literature, but not for history or philosophy, its disruptions could be minimalized. He would regard such counsel as extreme naivete. He would allow, I imagine, that a technology may be barred entry to a culture. But we may learn from Thamus the following. Once a technology is admitted, it plays out its hand. It does what it is designed to do. Our task is to understand what that design is. That is to say, when we admit a new technology to the culture, we must do so with our eyes wide open. And I want to take a pause for a moment and just talk about a very simple technology to illustrate this point. In America, you can go into any home improvement store or even to a drugstore and get a key reproduced. Part of this is the keys in America tend to be quite simple in their design, but we never had an industry, at least not so well established for many, many centuries, of people who make keys for a living. So these machines effectively put those people out of business, just like the photo booths put the photo developers out of business. This was not allowed to happen in France because the people who make keys, they also fix your shoes. They're cobblers. And between those two sources of income, making people's keys and cobbling their shoes, you can make a pretty decent living in France. And they're protected. And so these sorts of things are put into place against technologies to preserve the way the society is constructed. Part of that is the keys in France are more complex and they're not as easily made in a key machine. But it was because I'm certain that the key makers fought the introduction of this technology into France to preserve their way of life. And the keys are not significantly more expensive. I think you can get a key in America for a couple dollars, but every time I got keys made in France, it cost me $3, $4, or $5 at the most. Sometimes there are extremely technical computer-coded keys where you had to show proof of residence, and it was an anti-theft key. But those sorts of keys I think would have cost the same in America. My point is that that barrier was put in to preserve something else in the culture. And that meant that France thought through that. Another one was free shipping. Amazon free shipping introduced a competitive advantage into book selling for Amazon that France was not willing to admit. Because in France, you have to sell all books at the biggest discount you can have is 10% whatever the cover price is. So this says 13 US dollars, 17 Canadian. So the most you could sell it for would be 10% down from $13 if it's a new book. Free shipping was effectively an additional discount past the 10%, and France treasures its bookstores too much. I've heard a number like 13,000. I'm happy to be corrected in the comments if someone else knows precisely. But France treasures its bookstores so much that it wasn't willing to allow the technology of free shipping to undermine that. So societies can be in dialogue about the life they want versus the technologies they can have. What did France give up for not moving to key technology in which you can just operate it yourself using a few buttons? They preserved their industry of cobblers and key makers. What did France, quote unquote, give up by denying Amazon free shipping on books? Amazon, I think, can still do free shipping on other products, but not on books. They kept their treasures, their cultural treasures of bookstores, fighting an even playing field instead of against the large multinational corporation. I love it. And I'm happy to get into an argument in the comment section if you don't love it. But those decisions were made thoughtfully. Unlike in America, where every innovation is quote unquote good. We never question whether it's good or bad. We just assume it's better because it's new. That is a crazy way to think. But it's the way a young nation would think about itself, because we are ourselves a new thing. So we think everything we do is awesome. I think everyone else has learned that that's not true. All of this we may infer from Thamus's silence, but we may learn even more from what he does say than from what he doesn't. He points out, for example, that writing will change what is meant by the words memory and wisdom. He fears that memory will be confused with what he disdainfully calls recollection, and he worries that wisdom will become indistinguishable from mere knowledge. This judgment we must take to heart, for it is a certainty that radical technologies create new definitions of old terms, and that this process takes place without our being fully conscious of it. Thus, it is insidious and dangerous, quite different from the process whereby new technologies introduce new terms to the language. In our own time, we have consciously added to our language thousands of new words and phrases having to do with new technologies. VCR, software, front-wheel drive, window of opportunity, Walkman, etc. Maybe some of the young people watching this don't know what a Walkman is. We are not taken by surprise at this. New things require new words. But new things also modify old words, words that have deep-rooted meanings. The telegraph and the penny press changed what we once meant by information. Television changes what we once meant by the terms political debate, news, and public opinion. The computer changes information once again. Writing changed what we once meant by truth and law. Printing changed them again, and now television and the computer change them once more. Such changes occur quickly, surely, and in a sense, silently. Lexicographers hold no plebiscites on the matter. No manuals are written to explain what is happening, and the schools are oblivious to it. The old words still look the same, are still used in the same kinds of sentences, but they do not have the same meanings. In some cases, they have opposite meanings. And this is what Thamus wishes to teach us, that technology imperiously commandeers our most important terminology. It redefines freedom, truth, intelligence, fact, wisdom, memory, history, all the words we live by. and it does not pause to tell us, and we do not pause to ask. So, I hope that has whetted your appetite to read more of Professor Postman's book. It's not long. It's about 200 pages. So, not a long one. And I do hope to talk about more of his books in the future. But this is the one I would start you with. So, Neil Postman's Technopoly, as I alluded to already, you can buy a copy in the description. It's one of the ways you can support this channel. Free way you can support this channel. Like, subscribe, share this. You'll get the word out to more people, and you'll push the video out in the algorithm, which is always helpful to us. Buy a copy in the description. If you want to thank me for this presentation, you can use Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. If you want to thank me on an ongoing basis, there's Patreon and YouTube membership. You'll get early access to videos like this one, have the chance to chat with me behind the scenes, and also get videos that I don't produce for the general public, just for my members and patrons. If you want to nominate a book for the future, my Amazon wish list is also below. You'll see books on all sorts of topics, stuff that's very focused on Palestine. That's for my Palestine bookshelf project. Feel free to go check that out. Also, books just in general that you'll see for this channel. Buy one of them, send them my way, and I will do my best to review it in a timely manner. Until next time, enjoy your reading.